Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have just had very detailed talks with my colleague, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Kuwait, Abdullah Al-Yahya. We welcomed the growing interest of both governments, departments, and business circles of the two countries in the development of relations in all areas of our bilateral cooperation, paid special attention to the material basis of these relations, which is engaged in the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic, Scientific, and Technical Cooperation. It has not been going for a long time, and we agreed to accelerate its 7th meeting.
Достаточно давно не собиралась, и мы договорились ускорить проведение ее 7-го заседания.
It should take place in Moscow. We will try to do this by the end of this year. We also talked about encouraging the mutual interest of business circles in establishing practical contacts. A year ago, a business mission was held in Kuwait, which was organized by the Moscow Export Center, with the participation of a number of capital companies, and in February of this year, there was a similar event through the Moscow Tourism Committee, and a presentation of the tourist potential of the Russian capital was held in Kuwait.
И в Кувейте состоялась презентация туристического потенциала российской столицы.
And our country, in principle, has established itself as a popular tourist destination for the residents of Kuwait. Last year, the tourist flow increased almost tenfold compared to the 2022 year. We will encourage this trend in every possible way, as well as encourage Russian citizens to visit Kuwait. We talked about how to make these processes simpler, more comfortable, and we will have an additional decision to facilitate the visa regime. Russia introduced electronic visas for a large number of countries, including Kuwait, some time ago, and our Kuwaiti friends said they would make the same decision. This will significantly facilitate bureaucratic procedures when visiting Kuwait and, accordingly, the Russian Federation. But another area of our joint actions, which we expect to materialize in the very near future, is the establishment of direct flights. Routes between Kuwait City and Moscow, Makakala and Sochi are being discussed. All of this will certainly expand opportunities not only for tourism, but also for contacts between people in general, including businessmen and cultural figures. It was stated that this year another intergovernmental agreement entered into force, the Agreement on Military Technical Cooperation, according to which another intergovernmental commission of the relevant profile is being created. This will allow us to cooperate in this area, including taking into account the maintenance and modernization of our military technical products that were previously delivered to Kuwait. Well, I mentioned the humanitarian sphere. Last month, Kuwait Culture Week was successfully held in Moscow. It became a truly notable event in the cultural life of Moscow, aroused wide interest among art connoisseurs. And next year, Kuwait plans to implement our Russian Seasons project, within the framework of which, as a rule, dozens of events are organized with the participation of our ballet dancers, musical ensembles, choreographic groups, and so on. We talked a lot about international affairs and paid special attention to the Middle East settlement. Our priority tasks include stopping the escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the conflict that is growing in the Israeli-Lebanese border area. And we once again spoke in favor of taking urgent measures to cease fire, reduce tension, resolve humanitarian issues, and return refugees to their places of permanent residence. But, of course, it is necessary to create appropriate conditions for this. Behind all these urgent tasks, of course, we must not forget the goal of a long-term settlement, which can be achieved on the basis of a two-state solution by creating a Palestinian state in accordance with undecisions. And our commitment to this task has been fully confirmed today. We also talked about the situation in the waters of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, where obstacles are being created for safe international navigation. But we stand together with Kuwait for solving this problem by political and diplomatic methods, without resorting to military force and strikes on the territory of the Yemeni state. Under all circumstances, this problem can be finally resolved exclusively through dialogue, an intraethnic dialogue, with the participation of all Yemeni parties with the assistance of the UN. With regard to the Syrian Arab Republic, we have actively supported the process of normalization of relations between Syria and the League of Arab States. Syria has been returned as a full-fledged member of this organization, and at this stage, we support the sentiments that the Arab countries are now demonstrating regarding the support of the Syrian government in terms of solving the most acute socio-economic problems caused before, first of all, by illegal unilateral sanctions of the United States and its allies.
Острейших социально-экономических проблем, вызванных прежде всего незаконными односторонними санкциями Соединенных Штатов и их союзников.
We told our colleagues on how the situation develops in the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, including those contacts that are carried out between the Arab countries and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We welcome such contacts. These are countries that are all coastal in the Persian Gulf, and, of course, such a neighborhood requires the establishment of partnership, confidence building, and the development of mutually beneficial cooperation projects. We welcome such trends. We will support them politically, and we will be ready to participate in relevant economic, investment, and logistics projects. Another organization that is in the Cooperation Council of the Arab States of the Gulf. Kuwait will preside next year. And considering that a mechanism of strategic dialogue at the level of foreign ministers has been created between us, between Russia, and this council, the next meeting was held last month in Riyadh, and next year Russia will host a ministerial meeting, and Kuwait will chair the Gulf Cooperation Council, so we will prepare this ministerial event together. Well, we congratulated our friends on the fact that a Kuwaiti citizen, a representative of Kuwait, was elected Secretary General of the Dialogue on Cooperation in Asia. This is another association in which we cooperate and which we will pay special attention to strengthening by supporting the new Secretary General. We exchanged views on Ukraine, and we are grateful to our Kuwaiti friends for their balanced, objective position on this issue. We assessed the current state of affairs on the line of contact within the framework of a special military operation, and assessed what ideas are being discussed in the context of finding ways of settlement. There are many ideas, not all of them are dictated by a sincere desire to achieve peace. Representatives of the Kiev regime are constantly trying to provoke the West to engage in a war against the Russian Federation directly, without any hybrid modalities. President Putin spoke about this in great detail recently after the BRICS summit in Kazan. We see ways to end this crisis solely on the basis of the principles that were set out by President Putin on June 14th, at a speech at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and which are based on the need to respect the people, the rights of people who live in Ukraine, in those territories that voluntarily spoke out for reunification with Russia. On the principles of preventing any relapses of the bloc, of course, Ukraine should be with a neutral country. Attempts to draw it into NATO should be stopped. And, of course, it is necessary to eradicate those sprouts of neo-Nazism that are now burgeoning under the shadow of this Russian Russophobic regime in Kiev.
Должны быть прекращены попытки втянуть ее в НАТО, и, конечно, необходимо искоренить те ростки неонацизма, которые сейчас бурно расцветают под сенью этого российского русофобского режима в Киеве.
And we drew special attention of our Kuwaiti friends to the fact that in the declaration of the Kazan summit, one section is devoted to the Ukrainian topic, the essence of which boils down to the fact that everyone agreed on the need to resolve this conflict on the basis of the principles of the UN Charter in their entirety and interrelationship.
На основе принципов Устава ООН во всей их полноте.
This is an important statement because our Western colleagues in every possible way indulge the Kiev regime in the fact that it is necessary to resolve the conflict on the basis of the UN Charter and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, bearing in mind the borders of 1991 year. Eustefan is much richer than territorial integrity, and the General Assembly decided at the time that it is necessary to respect the territorial integrity of all states, whose governments represent the entire population living in the relevant territory. The fact that after the coup, after the adoption of Russophobic Russian laws prohibiting the Russian language in all spheres of life in Ukraine, after the people in the Donbass, in Novorossiya, in the Crimea, who did not accept the coup, they were called terrorists. A war was unleashed against them with the use of aviation, artillery. But can we say that this regime represents people who live in the Donetsk, Lugansk People's Republics, in the Crimea, in Kherson, Zaporozhye areas?
Донецкой, Луганской народных республиках, в Крыму, в Херсонской, Запорожской областях.
Of course not. And this statement that it is necessary to fully use and respect the principles of the UN Charter is also important, because the very first article contains the requirement to respect human rights regardless of gender, race, language, and religion. Gross violations of the linguistic and religious rights of the inhabitants of Ukraine are evident. And the West, which in any situation, for any reason and for no reason, always raises human rights on the shield, is shamefully silent with respect to its Kiev clients. Moreover, says the European Commission, the European Union, its leaders declare the need to support Ukraine to the very end, because Ukraine is fighting for European values. If European values are reduced to the propaganda and indulgence of Nazism, the destruction of linguistic and religious rights, then, strictly speaking, this is a sincere recognition of Europeans in what they are today. In conclusion, I would like to thank our Kuwaiti friends, my colleague and friend, for a very useful exchange of views, and give him the floor. First of all, I would like to say that I am very glad to be here in Moscow at the invitation of Mr. Sergey Lavrov, my dear friend, and for this opportunity to meet and discuss ways to strengthen bilateral relations between the Russian Federation and Kuwait, which were established in 1963 year. We discussed today during the negotiations of the Russian-Kuwaiti relations in various fields, have focused on issues of food security and cooperation in the military sphere, in education, as well as in the cultural field. as Mr. Minister pointed out.
Концентрировались на вопросах продовольственной безопасности, сотрудничестве в военной сфере, в образовании, а также в культурной области, как на это указал господин министр.
I also informed my dear friend Sergey Lavrov on all points of the dossier of Kuwaiti-Iraqi relations on our interaction with Iran, including within the framework of our membership in the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Взаимодействию с Ираном, в том числе в рамках нашего членства в Совете сотрудничества арабских государств Залива.
We also asked for the support of the Russian side on a number of issues. As for the problem in Kuwaiti-Iranian relations, and there are 3 points. The first is the border, the third point is the restoration of the archive, and the second point is the return of the remains of prisoners. It is necessary to find an alternative to the unassistance mission to Iraq, which completes its work in the 25th year. We also mentioned the efforts made by Yuri Vorontsov, who held one of the leading positions in the military structure. Also to other Russian representatives who for many years have provided the necessary assistance in solving this humanitarian problem. They played an important role in the return of the remains of prisoners, the dead, and the return of archives. We also discussed all issues of mutual interest, primarily the situation in the Middle East. We informed about the summit held between the GP and the European Union. We stressed the need to move forward for the recognition of independence, recognition of the Palestinian state, and a two-state solution to the problem. This should be preceded by an immediate ceasefire, as well as an appeal or invitation to international organizations and humanitarian organizations to enter the territory of Palestine as soon as possible. We also discussed the development of the situation in Lebanon. Today, we have already delivered humanitarian aid by sea and also by air to Lebanon in order to alleviate the situation there. I don't want to take up your opinion for a long time, and Mr. Lavrov touched on all the points that we discussed. Thank you again for your hospitality. And I really hope to see you in Kuwait soon next time. To the questions of the CUNA News Agency. Good afternoon. Before Ashab of the CUNA Kuwait News Agency. The first time I welcome you, Mr. Minister of Kuwait in Moscow. Secondly, my question to you. As you know, Kuwait has a rich diplomatic history. It is the first country in the Gulf which established relations with the Soviet Union. How is your assessment? How do you assess the development of Russian-Kuwaiti relations after 61 years since their establishment? As I said at the beginning of my speech, our relations have a privileged special character. We are very proud of these relations and strive to develop them in all areas, primarily in the trade and economic sphere. Now the level of our trade is about $1.6 billion. This amount is insufficient. We are determined to develop relations in the field of investment. Private companies are working, especially in the field of food security, to explore investment opportunities in this sector. Cooperation also continues in the military technical sphere and in education. We are also interested in increasing the number of educational scholarships for Kuwaiti citizens. Diplomatic academies in our countries also cooperate, carry out mutual training of diplomats. And this strengthens the ties at the level of society between the peoples of the two countries, and contributes to the development and dissemination of Russian culture in Kuwait. I think there are good prospects. As my dear brother, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, has already indicated, we will work on the topic of facilitating the ELM procedures so that this process satisfies both sides. Perhaps it will be some kind of smart visas that will be obtained. It will be possible to get mobile phones through the application. But in any case, we confirm that we are interested in developing bilateral relations for mutual benefit.
Good afternoon, dear ministers. I will have two questions for both ministers. The first one is Sergey Viktorovich to you. There are calls from France and other European countries to send troops to Ukraine to participate in military operations in response to what is rumored to be the deployment of North Korean forces to support the Russian army. If this happens, what will be Moscow's reaction?
Yes, it has already happened. The President has repeatedly cited specific data that servicemen of Western armies are fighting in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. There are mercenaries, there are so-called volunteers, and there are also direct instructors, without whom it is impossible to use not only Western long-range weapons, but also Ukrainian long-range weapons. Without the help of Western specialists, without space intelligence data, which Ukrainians certainly do not have, without specialists in programming flight missions, these troops will not use rocket technology they can.
Программированию полетных заданий эти войска использовать ракетную технику не могут.
Therefore, Western military personnel have been working in Ukraine for a long time. This is part of the hybrid war of NATO and the European Union against our country, and we know this very well. As for our relations with the Democratic People's Republic, we have repeatedly said that the contract is not confidential, and it is open. The entire text was published, and it in no way violates any of the provisions of international law, because it involves, among other things, assist each other in case one of the countries participating in the agreement will be carried out military attack. So here our position is absolutely honest and open. Such crafty statements that we will send troops to Ukraine under some pretext, but this is probably just an attempt to justify in hindsight what has been happening for a long time.
And the second question, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kuwait, allow me.
Mr. Minister, there are talks about holding an Arab summit, expected in Saudi Arabia in early November, to discuss the situation in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon, what to expect from this summit, and what benefits it will bring to the current Arab efforts in this context. We believe that this summit is very necessary to complement all the efforts that are being made for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip or Wani. I believe that this is a chance. Complement the activities carried out by the Arab Muslim Ministerial Group. We welcome this invitation, these appeals, and I hope we will take part in it. It is necessary to understand what to do after the end of the war. I hope that soon it will all be clarified by the dear ministers of correspondent Siru Ashayev.
Sergey Viktorovich, parliamentary elections have been held in Georgia. The Georgian Dream Party wins them. If representatives of the Georgian authorities consider it possible to come to Moscow, are they ready to talk to them here? Thank you.
Now we have no diplomatic relations because the previous Georgian leadership relations have ceased, but both we and the Georgian side have representative offices on each other's territory in the form of interest sections at the Swiss embassy. In this capacity, our diplomats work in Tbilisi. They report on the events taking place, of course. They promote the development of ties, including trade and economic ones, which are really on the rise. Tourism is developing. And our diplomats, of course, always discuss emerging issues with representatives of the Georgian authorities. If there are any additional proposals on contacts from our Georgian neighbors, of course, we will consider them. We have never left contact. And final questions from Russia Today. Good afternoon, Maximal Chura, RDTV channel. Let me ask you the first question. Sergey Viktorovich, about the Middle East. How Moscow assesses the situation in the Middle East after the Israeli attacks and strikes on Iran? Has the region managed to avoid the worst-case scenario, or on the contrary? Will these strikes become a new round of escalation of the conflict? And the second question. At this stage, of course, managed to avoid the worst-case scenario. It succeeds, at least because its probability still persists. Here, as in the case of the Ukrainian situation, there are those who want to warm up the hearth, the bonfire, to such an extent that the United States intervenes first of all, but I really hope that the contacts made recently will not allow this to happen. At least, we are doing everything possible to help stop the escalation and somehow diffuse this situation. Of course, the Israeli strikes on Iran, which are presented as a response, and that, they say, now the answer has taken place. We are kind of even, and we don't need to do anything else. This is a difficult situation. They have not simplified the situation. But we hope that the Security Council will be able to help in some way calm the situation, at the suggestion of Algeria. China and Russia, the Council should consider Iran's appeal about what happened in New York tonight. I think a lot of things will become clearer after this discussion, although this does not mean that we need to give up and hope for the best. No. We need to work. We need to achieve a ceasefire, both in the Palestinian territories and in Lebanon. We need to agree on how to stabilize the situation in the long term and, of course, solve humanitarian problems. They are escalating. New waves of refugees have appeared, and they also need to be returned to their native places. But of course, as I said in my opening speech, the task of creating a Palestinian state in full compliance with UN decisions is becoming more and more urgent. And the second question of the gentleman. Mr. Minister, after your consultations in Russia on the crisis in the region, what are the priorities in ending this bloodbath, and what are the fundamental principles from which you proceed for the implementation of a full resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict in the region? From the very beginning of the war and the events after the events of the 7th of October. The beginning of the war in Gaza. Today, there are more than 140,000 wounded. The number of dead is growing. The number of people who were forced to leave their homes is growing. Kuwait participated in all international events, during which it called for a ceasefire, called for the recognition of Palestine, called for the creation of two states. The Palestinians have been suffering from this situation for more than 70 years. Of course, I do not support what happened on October 7th, but all this happened in the light of the powerful pressure and oppression of the Palestinians. I would like, and we would like, for the parties to the conflict to have already become, to sit down at the negotiating table, so that they can achieve recognition of Palestine as an independent state, based on a two-state solution, because I believe that this is the only way to stop this bloodbath. We are in contact with our friendly countries to exert pressure on the parties to the conflict, but we believe that it will be possible to reach a ceasefire in the near future. Thank you.